How would you like to have this colorful veggie scrambler for breakfast? Stay tuned and I will show you how. Hello again everyone, this is Joy. Welcome to the Red Gingham. My favorite meal of the day is breakfast. That's because I'd like to feel full early in the day rather than later. And my favorite meal to order at restaurants is the Scrambler. But today I'm going to show you how I make mine without the meat and without the eggs. So let's get cooking. Our ingredients are teeny-weeny potatoes, red and blue potatoes, about 3 cloves of garlic, about 3/4 of a medium-sized onion, cremini mushrooms, about 2 to 3 cups of broccoli, and optional items like red bell pepper and avocado. Now it's time to cut up our veggies. Let's start with the teeny-weeny potatoes. First, let's trim the ends. And then I like to cut them lengthwise. This makes the potato thinner, making it easier to cook later on. For these rounder potatoes, I'd like to remove the eyes first using a bird's beak knife. You know those round things, I call them eyes. So just carve it out using a bird's beak knife like I'm using here. If you don't have a bird's beak knife, a paring knife will do as well. So just remove that eye. And there you go. And then I like to cut them in quarters. So slice it in half first, and then half again. So now I have 4 pieces out of these smaller potatoes. It makes them easier to cook, and it's a good bite size. All the potatoes have now been cut up, so it's time to heat up our pan to brown the potatoes. I'm using canola oil, but I'm going to use very little. I just want to have a little bit of browning on the potatoes. About, I'd say, just like that. That's about, I don't know, a teaspoon or 2. Very little. You just want to smear the pan. Swirl it around and heat it up a little. And now we're ready to add the potatoes. I'm going to put them flat side down, and I'm just going to lay them. The pan is not very hot, but there's just a little bit of sizzle in the pan. So I'm just going to lay them all and come back to it later. While the potatoes are cooking, it's time to cut up the rest of the veggies, starting with the garlic. So we'll mince the garlic. First, I cut them lengthwise, tiny strips, thin strips actually. Just lengthwise on the garlic. And then I turn them around, just like that, and then start chopping them into tiny pieces. Just keep going and chop them up into tiny pieces. Now it's time to bring in the onion. So first, I remove the ends of the onion, then peel out that skin, remove the other end. A little bit more there. Remove the papery part of the onion, which is the outer skin. There's a little bit more, so we'll trim that off. And then I also cut lengthwise along the grain of the onion. You'll see it lengthwise. And then just like the garlic, I turn it around and cut crosswise. Okay, mushrooms are next. I like to keep them chunky so I don't slice them too thin. That way also you can see it on your plate what it is you're eating. These are cremini mushrooms, but you can also use white mushrooms if you prefer. I cut through the stem if it's short. If you come to a long stem, then I just cut it lengthwise. Next is the red bell pepper. This is an optional item, but I like to use it because it adds color to my plate and also it tastes good. I'm going to be using about this much red bell, maybe around, yeah, right there, about 1/4 of the red bell pepper. Right there, just that much. I'm going to cut it lengthwise. So that will be 1/4 of the red bell pepper. Cut it right there, just pry it out. Remove the seeds. Cut off the ends so it's easy to slice. And then cut it lengthwise. Turn it the other way and then cut it crosswise. Now it's time to check on our potatoes. So flip it over. Yeah, that's the amount of browning I want. Just right to give us interest on the plate. It looks good. So I'm just going to flip them all over. We're not done at this point, so what I'm going to do is add a little bit of water, about 1/4 cup of water. Let that steam and let the steam finish up the cooking of the potatoes. This cuts down the oil that we're going to use to cook up the potato. Let's see how our potatoes are doing. So with a fork, we'll just test it. As you can see, the water has evaporated because we used very little. And these potatoes are done. Tender, yet still firm enough. Now, experts on plant-based diet recommend that we do away with salt, oil, and sugar. But since we're in transition, we're going to use just a little, just a pinch or two of salt here that I'm using. And we toss the potatoes to incorporate that salt well. And now we're going to add tarragon. I like the flavor of tarragon. It's really very mild. And you almost cannot overdo tarragon because it's so mild. This is organic tarragon, which I got from Walmart, but any other grocery should have it. I also like to use a little bit of rosemary for a hint of that rosemary flavor. Now, rosemary has a stronger flavor than tarragon, so if you're not familiar with it, start with very little, maybe just a pinch. Toss well, turn off the heat at this point, and cover it up to keep warm. Now it's time to do the rest of the veggies. I'm going to add a little bit of oil to this heated pan. Just a tad bit. This is just for the garlic. Very little, maybe just a little bit more right there. Let's add in the garlic. Now you don't want your pan to be too hot or your garlic will burn too quickly. So you just want a little bit of sizzle without smoking. Notice that the oil is just enough to coat our garlic. I'm focusing the garlic on this one side of the pan where the oil is. Just right here. Very little oil. And there's no oil on the rest of the pan. Our garlic has now turned golden brown, and that's the color where I want it. So I'm going to set this aside to prevent the garlic from cooking any further. Now let's add in the onions. Give it a stir, and now we can add in the broccoli. Again, I'm going to be adding about 1/4 cup of water to let the steam cook the veggies. Cover it up and cook it in its steam. Now let's check on our broccoli. That looks good. It's still a little firm, but that's fine. It's going to continue to cook when we add in the rest of the vegetables. So I'm putting it aside, pushing it aside to one side of the pan. I'm going to add in the garlic that we just cooked, put it on top of the broccoli. Now I'm going to add in the rest of the veggies, starting with the red bell peppers. And then the mushrooms. So now I'm going to add about 1/4 cup of water again to let the mushrooms and peppers to cook. Season it with black pepper to taste and cover it up. After simmering for 5 minutes, I think this is ready. Look at that. Turn the heat off at this point. Mix it all together, and I think we're ready to plate up. Isn't this just a beautiful color presentation? I just love it when my plate is filled with color, just like this one. Now let's add in the potatoes. And finally the avocado. The avocado is optional, but I just happen to have it, so why not? I hope you enjoyed my version of the Veggie Scrambler. What about you? Is breakfast your favorite meal of the day too? Do you have a way of making a regular breakfast into a healthier one? If so, I appreciate your comments below. But before we close, I'd like first to give a shout out to my friend from the Philippines who I will call TLR. TLR, thank you for this beautiful, pretty earrings that you sent me. Thank you for watching The Red Gingham. Till then, let's try to eat healthy.